Israel launched its largest attack on the West Bank in 20 years this week. And many of us have known that this was coming, have warned that this was coming, because if Israel's been allowed to act with total impunity in Gaza for 10 months, then there was no way that that violence wasn't going to be enacted elsewhere. So now here we are, the largest invasion in the West Bank since the Second Intifada over 2 decades ago. And Israel is targeting neighborhoods and cities and refugee camps in Jenin, in Tulkarm, in Nablus, in Jerusalem. Infrastructure has been targeted and destroyed. Cell infrastructure, internet infrastructure, water infrastructure, sewage infrastructure. Palestinians in the West Bank are trapped, surrounded by settlements and checkpoints. And for those who don't know, let me provide a little bit of context, because the West Bank looks different than Gaza does. This is a map of the West Bank from OCHA, June 2020. This is not completely up to date, but it's good enough for our purposes. So everything that you see that is not in this darker yellow shade or this lighter yellow shade, everything that is not one of these shades, these ones right here, is either an Israeli settlement, an Israeli outpost, or controlled by Israel. So all of this gray, all of this blue, all of that, if you look closer, there's like areas of red. Those are settlements. Everything around here controlled by Israel. So what does that mean? Look at these plots of Palestinian land. They're separated into Bantustans. You cannot access different parts of the West Bank without going through checkpoints. Those checkpoints are manned by Israeli soldiers, a lot of whom are teenagers, wielding these AKs. So you have an 18-year-old Israeli soldier and every Palestinian in the West Bank subjected to these teenage Israeli soldiers, deciding who gets to move, who gets to do what, whether you're allowed to visit your family, whether you're allowed to go to the next town over. And within this system, there's also segregated towns, segregated roads. You are not allowed into certain places. And if you notice strategically how the rest of this is set up, it surrounds every Palestinian town. Settlement positioning is intentional. It is strategic on Israel's part. Every illegal Israeli settlement is established, funded, subsidized by Israel. And all of the outposts are also supported by Israel. Now, Gaza hasn't had settlers living within its boundaries since the early 2000s, which is just one part of the reason why Israel can act so brazenly in its genocide against Palestinians in Gaza. The on-the-ground reality, as you can see in the West Bank, is not the same. Palestinians are separated, segregated in a lot of ways from settlers, but they are still fundamentally living, forced to live, between settlers. So while Palestinians live in these Bantustans, it does not prevent them from harassment and attacks and even being murdered by settlers. And those settlers have the full backing of the state and often are actually being protected by Israeli soldiers when they go on mob attacks, when they attack Palestinians. Settlements will steal resources like water from Palestinians and then turn around and dump their sewage and their waste on Palestinian land. And oftentimes what happens with settlements is they will be physically positioned above Palestinian land. So they'll be built on hilltops in an attempt to intimidate and harass Palestinians. You are quite literally looking up at settlers. The main exception to this is down here in Khalil, which is actually where I'm from, where settlers live within the town, and that comes with its own set of challenges and daily violence that is ever shifting, because remember, all of these Palestinians are living at the whim of Israeli occupation soldiers and of settlers. So any day, a route that you could take that was normally fine might suddenly have Israeli soldiers, it might suddenly have settlers, and you can no longer pass on that route. That's just some context for you on what the West Bank actually looks like. Now, Jenin, which is one of the places being attacked, has been the center of resistance in the West Bank for decades. There's a refugee camp in Jenin, and the refugees there survived the Nakba. They fled the Nakba. And since then, they have been tirelessly fighting for their rights, for their right to return, for their dignity, for humanity. Jenin has been repeatedly targeted by Israeli forces through the years. And since October, it has been repeatedly attacked by Israeli forces. It has been bombed, it has been bulldozed. Currently, as we speak, Israeli soldiers are bulldozing entire sections of the refugee camp. They are shooting people, drone striking people, preventing ambulances from getting to them. It is a nightmare. Palestinians are trapped or being forcibly removed from their homes in order for their homes to be demolished. This is a photo of what the eastern bloc of Jenin currently looks like. Do you see this destruction? Do you see this? Do you see the tanks and how openly they are destroying this town in the West Bank? And this isn't just happening in Jenin, it's happening in all of those places that I mentioned in the north of Gaza, Tulkarem and Nablus, in parts of Jerusalem. It is an all-out attack on Palestinians. Hospitals have been shut down, mosques have been bombed, refugee camps have been bombed. Settler mobs are on rampages across the West Bank, again with full backing of the Israeli occupation soldiers. Last I saw in the West Bank this week, at least a dozen Palestinians have been murdered by Israel, and DCIP stated that at least 5 Palestinian children were murdered. And this joins the hundreds of Palestinians who've been murdered by Israel in the West Bank since October. This is just the latest violence. While Israel is continuing its genocide in Gaza, it is also engaging in this violence in the West Bank, which should tell you that this was never about any singular group. It was always about Palestinians. It was always about colonization and discrimination and ethnic cleansing and land theft and murder.